Okay, this is a little bit of a palate cleanser after the last review I uploaded. So if you're not watching this in order, that won't make any sense at all. But um, moving right along, this is Hollywood versus the Aliens by Bruce Rux. The motion picture industry's participation in UFO disinformation. Lots of interesting stuff in this book, and this is a serious read, weighing in at, including the index, at 681 pages. So lots of good information. And personally, this is one of those books that I find myself going back to over and over and dog-earing different sections. I'll keep this fairly brief because overall it's what it says. It's kind of an analysis of Hollywood's treatment of the topic of aliens, UFOs, and that sort of thing in various movies and all. And a lot of that is, most of it is what you'd expect, but every now and then there's some really interesting information about the intelligence community as it relates to the UFO subculture. And that's the main thing that intrigued me. So what I wanted to talk about here, and that I think this audience will find interesting, is some of what he talks about Ian Fleming and the James Bond series. And some of the very interesting stuff there, kind of some weird little coded things about the UFO subculture or the UFO enigma that was kind of inserted by Ian Fleming into some of his writing. And it's also interesting that Ian Fleming, and this is mentioned in here as well, was relatively had a fairly close relationship with Aleister Crowley, which of course is, we all know who he is. So really interesting stuff about like the Disco Volante, which is the ship I believe operated by Blofeld, and the Disco Volante translates to flying disc or flying saucer. So there's lots of little things like that about some of the James Bond movies. So just that section alone about some of the James Bond stuff and a lot of the hidden meanings and some of that in the is definitely worth checking out. And I'm trying to see what all I've dog-eared to see what is relevant. Anyway, it goes through a variety of movies that have subtext dealing with different aspects of UFOs and all that. And I think it was in here, I believe it's in this section where he talks about the James Bond villain Blofeld of Spectre fame or whatever the fictional thing, that he was based off of Aristotle Onassis. So there's some very interesting organized crime stuff slipped into some of these works. And again, when you start getting into, I always find it interesting when Aleister Crowley's name pops up, especially when it relates to something like UFOs, because I think there's a real tie-in to creating belief systems. And I've talked about that on previous reviews of things like Messengers of Deception, which I'll of course link at the end of the video. That to me, the UFO topic is more fascinating in its role in creating belief systems. When you strip away the sensational aspect of it, you start to see that this is an exercise, and again, maybe not all of it. There could be some legitimate alien activity. Who knows? I by no means am in possession of all that knowledge. But I think a lot of what we see in the UFO subculture is an exercise in the creation of belief systems. And that is a very powerful tool where intelligence agencies are concerned. So overall, his general take on it is different from mine. He believes, I think his overall view is that kind of the alien thing is being hidden from the public, and the message of some of these movies is being manipulated to hide the existence of aliens or encourage certain attitudes about aliens. But I find really interesting the involvement of the intelligence agencies along with the film industry, I think is very telling. So anyway, overall, pretty straightforward, but lots of good information in this. And again, this is a very dense read. So it's one that If you're like me, I personally, I'll go back and forth to these book like this as I'm reading something else, because a lot of this, you can kind of take sections of this at a time. And this is definitely one that there's so much in here that you'll find yourself Googling a lot of the stuff to see, how some of this stuff has worked out. Oh, and I almost did not mention the publishing date of this. This is from 1997. So it's always interesting to go through some of these books like this and see how some of this information holds up in the age of the internet, when obviously this was written when the internet was young, but now there's so much more stuff out there. It's real easy to go online and verify or cross-reference some of the names and information you see in books like this. But anyway, there you go. Hollywood versus the Aliens by Bruce Rux from 1997.